The thing with these toxic elements is once they get in your body, a lot of times they just stay there for decades, right? So even if you're not exposed right now, if you were exposed in the past and your body was not able to excrete it, a lot of times that stuff gets stuck in tissue. So that's one of the challenges. The body's focus on short-term survival over long-term function is if the mercury is it's tucked in tissue, causing minimal issues at the moment. Maybe it hasn't resulted in the neurodegeneration or whatever, but it's also not causing inflammation in the short term because it's not being exposed to the processing center. The body doesn't really want to let it go out of tissue because if you detox it, if your body excretes it from tissue, it has to go through the processing center. That's going to cause stress. So the reason the body put it into tissue was to remove that initial source of stress, put it into storage. When it comes out of storage, it's like you were just exposed for the first time. It can be stressful.
Welcome to the Too Curious MD podcast. I'm Dr. Alya Ahmad.
And I'm Dr. Alya Ahmad.
With the wisdom from holistic, alternative, and these conventional medicine, we are here to challenge the status quo.
We're curious about the connectivity and complexity between diverse fields of knowledge as they relate to consciousness, chronic illness, mental health, resilience, and beyond.
Learning more about the art and science of healing, or listening to stories of extraordinary healing. You're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of the Too Curious MD podcast, where medicine is more than science. It's story, art, connection, and integration. This is the space for the curious. Let's dive in. Today's guest is Jeff Hoyt, a wellness innovator and founder of Zeolite Labs and a host for the Detox Experience podcast, a platform dedicated to exploring detoxification, root cause healing, heavy metal toxicity, and the evolving world, which I love, of integrative wellness. Jeff's work sits at the intersection of curiosity and unconventional thinking, and through conversations with physicians, functional medicine practitioners, health educators, and individuals navigating chronic illness, he's become known for challenging the status quo around detoxification and around the deeper questions about what it may be driving our modern health struggles. His podcast, The Detox Experience, explores real-world healing stories, the science and controversy around detoxification, environmental toxins, nervous system regulation, gut health, and what it means to approach wellness from a root cause perspective. Today's conversation, we'll explore the detox culture through a more nuanced lens, asking what detoxification actually means biologically and environmentally, and of course, emotionally as well, because we deal with that in our center when we talk about treatment-resistant conditions and its impact on mental health. We'll discuss heavy metals, and modern toxic burden, the nervous system, and why so many people are searching for answers outside of conventional medicine. So welcome, Jeff Hoyt, to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you. Your work has become deeply connected to detoxification and root cause wellness. Can you tell us a little bit about what sparked your interest in detox and environmental health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of started with there's so many great things, so many great protocols out there, right? And I was utilizing a lot of more of the natural alternative methods. And I had a biohacking center where I had, a lot of the fun technology people could come in and use, oxygen therapies and hydrogen, PEMF and all these other things. And it was great because people could come in and it could help them combat the modern stressors of, 21st century living, kind of props up their body, makes them better able to deal with things. But if they stopped coming in, it would go back to feeling terrible, right? So I said, this is okay, but it's not really sustainable because one, when people are coming in every day, it's very expensive. And it's not getting to what I would call the root cause, right? It's not removing the source of the issue to begin with so that then when they stop it, then they're better. So that's when I got into detox. I said, all right, we need to figure out something where people can do a protocol or, change their lifestyle or something that when they stop doing it, they're better off than when they started. So it's not just propping up the system, but it's also helping resolve internal issues. So I started digging into detox and, there's tons. Detox is just a massive, massive field with lots of therapies and modalities. And I, explored a lot of them and then got, we could talk about some of the different ones, but basically I delve into detox and say, all right, this is what I'm going to focus my professional career in, because I think that it's something that is misunderstood a lot in the community. And it's sometimes a little bit more challenging than people think. That's where I'm at now.
Okay. Detox is a buzzword, and especially in our field and in wellness, the wellness world as well, and you mentioned biohacking. From what perspective, and well, tell us a little bit more about what detoxification actually means biologically to our audience.
Yeah. And so I'll give you my definition first of detoxification, and that would be removing unwanted things from your body or from your life. So anything that is weighing you down, that is adding stress, making your body work harder than normal to stay balanced, whether from an internal and stored toxicant perspective or, emotional stressors, relationships, all that thing. So that's all, removing stuff that you don't need or you don't want in your life, getting rid of it. That's detox. In medicine and in alternative health, when we talk about detox, we're really talking about removing these stored toxic elements that accumulate in tissue and the body. So things like heavy metals, mercury, cadmium, lead, arsenic, environmental toxicants, microplastics, glyphosate, these issues. And that's generally when you hear people talk about detox, is talking about getting those things out of the body.
Well, tell our audience a little bit about, because we both providers who listen to this podcast as well as patients. How does that toxin actually impact or cause chronic symptoms? And how would that accumulation worsen that condition, say, for gut issues or for mental health?
Yeah. And the first thing to understand is that our bodies are detox machines, right? We're all detoxing all the time. So it's not that we have to completely rely on some sort of external therapy or supplement to do the work for us. We want to encourage our bodies to work better. So that's really one of the keys with detox. And the challenge is our bodies are designed to deal with some level of stress and toxicity. And if we're, consuming toxins in the food, water, and air, and our bodies are able to handle them on a daily basis, kind of process them and excrete them through normal processes, then we're going to have minimal negative effects from those. But if the external exposure becomes greater than what our body is able to deal with, the body has to do something with that toxicity. And the natural storage unit for toxins is going to be fat. So at that point, the body starts tucking these toxic elements away into tissue and says, we can't deal with it now. Let's tuck it away and deal with it later. So when we talk about toxicity, there's kind of different levels to toxicity and levels to toxin storage, and they result in different symptoms for different people. So one, you have, I call it level 1 toxicity, and this is your daily dose of toxicity or your active toxicity or what your body's currently processing, like processing center toxicity. So that's what you're exposed to daily from external sources, along with what's being produced from internal, like inside of you, whether it's metabolic waste products like ammonia, urea, histamine, or it's microbial waste products, or it's recycled toxicity, et cetera. All of this stuff kind of makes up your daily dose of toxicity. And when it's being processed and the body says, all right, we have this toxicity, let's excrete it, let's break it down, let's get rid of it, and we'll be good to go, right? When it's in that processing center, it's causing more acute issues because it's there, your body's dealing with it. It might be causing an inflammatory reaction, an immune reaction if it's in excess. And that's the problem when people become symptomatic from toxicities, because their body can't handle the level of toxicity they're dealing with on a daily basis. And this could be a chronic issue where every single day you're dealing with more than what your body can handle. And that could be twofold. One, because you're exposed to a lot, or because your body's not working properly, or a combination. Or it could be from an acute exposure where you're just exposed to something at a high level and your body just is not able to get rid of it all right now. So there's that issue. And then you have the long-term accumulation, where if you have a sustained period where there is this toxicity coming in that your body can't process, you're getting accelerated accumulation in tissue. So the body is more focused on the short-term survival opposed to the long-term function or long-term thrival. So that's the first thing to understand, because we might ask, well, if these toxic elements are bad and causing these issues, then why would our body, why would it keep them in there? And it's because it's actually, when the body tucks a heavy metal like mercury in tissue, it's causing less problems immediately than if it was floating around and being processed, because it's hidden from the defense systems and the immune system, and it's not causing the same level of inflammatory reaction. So on the short term, some of the symptoms that it might be causing could be headaches, irritability, joint pain, just exaggerating the inflammatory response, which could be exaggerating any of the symptoms that you're currently experiencing or prone to. Whereas when it gets tucked in tissue, it's more of a neurodegeneration. So if you have mercury in your central nervous system, your brain, it might be causing more long-term neurodegenerative conditions, but it's over time. So the short-term daily dose toxicity causes immediate issues if your body can't handle it. And then the stored toxicity is, after 20, maybe 10, 20, 30 years, or just depending on the person, it starts building up and kind of passing what the body can handle in tissue. And you get some of those long-term chronic issues.
Fascinating. I mean, I can definitely see, can you give us an example of how mercury or lead kind of leads to this toxic effect?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also multiple things because there's so many symptoms that can arise from different toxic elements. And it kind of depends on the individual and what they're prone to. But there's different things to consider when it comes to, let's say, mercury or any other toxic element. One, we want to consider the amount of mercury present. All right. So that's an issue. We want to consider the level of sensitivity to mercury, because if you and I were both exposed to the same level of mercury, but I had a stronger immune reaction to it, that same mercury is going to cause more issues for me because it's a stronger inflammatory reaction. So we have to look at the sensitivity or the immune reactivity to an element, the level of the element, and then synergy between elements. So when you have mercury in it, if that's combined with aluminum or lead or some other metal, they become synergistically more toxic. So there's that issue. But for example, like mercury is notorious for causing more like neurological issues. So it could potentially be contributing to Alzheimer's, neurodegeneration. There was a researcher at the University of Kentucky, Boyd Haley, a
Yeah.
biochemist. And his research was on Alzheimer's, trying to kind of identify some of the causes of Alzheimer's. This was a number of years ago. And he identified mercury as really the top, in his mind, the top contributor to Alzheimer's. And even though there's kind of a combination of other issues, but he said, out of the 6 kind of traits of Alzheimer's, mercury was the only substance that could cause all 6 on its own and not even in combination. So he traced the onset of Alzheimer's to the release of the mercury amalgam fillings in the early, like 1840s, I think, were the first amalgam fillings being used. And the first case of Alzheimer's, I believe, was 1906. So the first generation of people that died that had the amalgam fillings, that's when Alzheimer's started existing for the first time. And Alzheimer's can be, one of the characteristics of Alzheimer's is a reduced brain size. So through autopsies, it wasn't a lack of technology we had that we just started identifying it. It was, you could see, a 25% shrunken brain if you had Alzheimer's, and that was never seen before until the 1900s. So he was connecting all this and basically identifying that mercury was one contributing factor. And it's because, the brain is very fatty, and that's where these toxic elements like mercury like to accumulate, right? So the challenge with amalgams is that they're so close to your brain that that's one of the nearest fatty, that's the nearest fatty organ. So it's going to go to the brain or the thyroid or somewhere nearby. So a lot of times there's issues. So there's a lot of issues that can be caused by specific metals. And then when you combine metals, it causes more issues. But generally you have, an inflammatory response. You might develop some sort of autoimmunity. You might develop, accelerated allergies, all sorts of stuff. And if you have another condition, a pre-existing condition, and then you add heavy metals or toxic elements on top of it, then it just exaggerates the symptoms you were already experiencing because it's more for the body to deal with.
Just historically, I think the Greeks or the Romans were known to use mercury because it kind of beautified the fountains, and they would have, that's historically some of the exposures that we know about really came from, what we learned about that kind of exposure. When the Greeks used it to beautify their water, fountains and pools. So, you mentioned exposure. Where are we seeing this kind of exposure of mercury, lead, arsenic, and why are we seeing this increase if we're clearing it or we're supposed to be clearing it in our water systems or in our, in our land or wherever it tends to store? Why are we behind the ball here?
Yeah. So there's a good question. And there's in some areas less exposure than there used to be of those specific metals because there's more awareness and more research done showing the negative effects of those things. But then we have an increased level of other toxic sources through manufacturing processes and things that have been less studied. And the problem is really the synergy and the combination of the toxic elements that overburden the system. But just for sources of like mercury, the biggest source by far is going to be the amalgam fillings. And, the more amalgam fillings, because those are 50% mercury by content. So, there's just a lot of mercury in there. And then you have, fish is a source. Especially the larger fish like tuna or, swordfish or something like that. And there's a number of sources. They used to be in some more of the medical interventions that they have taken them out of for safety concerns. And then there was pre-exposure years ago through like the thermometers, the mercury thermometers that people would, take apart and play with because they were, fun to play with. And the external, actually, like in those, the skin exposure results in more accumulation in the body than internal exposure. So it's kind of interesting. So the thing with these toxic elements is once they get in your body, a lot of times they just stay there for decades, right? So even if you're not exposed right now, if you were exposed in the past and your body was not able to excrete it, a lot of times that stuff gets stuck in tissue. So that's one of the challenges. And because going back to the body's focus on short-term survival over long-term function is if the mercury is I'll say safely, it's tucked in tissue causing minimal issues at the moment. Maybe it hasn't resulted in the neurodegeneration or whatever, but it's also not causing inflammation in the short term because it's not being exposed to the processing center. The body doesn't really want to let it go out of tissue because if you detox it, if your body excretes it from tissue, it has to go through the processing center. That's going to cause stress, right? So the reason the body put it into tissue was to remove that initial source of stress, put it into storage. When it comes out of storage, it's like you were just exposed for the first time. It can be stressful. So especially if someone has more of a complex or chronic issue, their body is much less likely to naturally let go of the stored toxicity because it's too stressful on the way out. So it might be previous exposure, it might be current exposure. And I think one of the big things is even forgetting about the physical toxic elements, which are many. I mean, like I always say, food, water, and air. I mean, there's a lot of toxic elements we're exposed to, personal care products, all this stuff. And then when you add the just emotional stressors and the mental stressors and the physical stressors of modern living, those all contribute to taking energy from the body that it could otherwise be using towards detox. Because the body only has a certain amount of energy that it can allocate for everything on a daily basis. And if a lot of that's being taken up for an emotional or mental or some other purpose, the body's not going to prioritize detox because it says, well, we can just tuck this stuff into tissue. Right. So it's not just about the exposure to the toxic physical toxicants. It's also the exposure to other stressors that are inhibiting our body's natural detox processes and taking away energy.
Well, it sounds really that the body is quite intelligent and able to kind of discern when it needs to kind of clear it out of the body and when it needs to store it. And then I'm curious to know what that process would be, physiologically. How does the body know when this mercury or this heavy metal needs to be tucked away and not processed through the kidneys or the liver to break down? And also, you also mentioned the immune system as an inflammatory response. And of course, and how heavy metals it may not be just one single metal, but it may be multiple level toxins together that is causing that reaction. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I don't remember the exact combination of metals, but Boyd Haley actually did some research on this as well, where he was looking at neurotoxicity. Like this was in vitro. He was putting, I think, aluminum and lead and mercury and aluminum and different combinations of three of the more immune stimulatory metals. And they were up to 100 times as toxic to the brain cells in combination than individually.
And I do want to ask about the difference between inorganic and organic mercury. Because when we talk about organic mercury, which is present in natural resources such as water or in fish, versus inorganic mercury, which is a preservative often used in vaccines, thimerosal, for one example, there is a difference in how the body metabolizes that, correct?
Yeah, there is a difference. And so there's some people who say all metals are the same regardless of form. And I would disagree with that because, I mean, mercury, I would say, is toxic in all forms because mercury is a little bit different. You have certain things like aluminum, which there's a number of variations of aluminum. You've got, you've got synthetic aluminum that is specifically designed to cause immune stimulation. That's put in, medical interventions and various things. Then you've got alumina or aluminum oxide that is naturally occurring from the earth, which is one of the most abundant elements in the earth. And that is a non-metallic material. It's actually considered a ceramic, and it's not very immunostimulatory, and it's not conductive. So the very different properties based on the levels. But I think with organic and inorganic mercury, they're both going to be very toxic. I think it depends on accumulation. The body processes them a little different. So, and I don't remember which one is which, but I think one of them is absorbed much better through the skin, maybe the inorganic, and then one of them is absorbed better internally, like through oral consumption. So I think the body processes them a little bit differently. But I do think in the case of mercury, they're both pretty immune stimulatory and can both cause issues in excess. But it all comes down to what is the body able to handle, right? And that's depends on the person. So you could give 10 people the same exact amount of mercury, like mercury poisoning, and maybe one of them dies, maybe 5 of them get sick, maybe 4 of them don't get sick at all, right? It's just based on their body's capacity to deal with and process that poison as it comes in. And if their bodies are dealing with a bunch of other stuff at the same time, they're going to have less energy to deal with the current poison because they're already preoccupied, where someone that is physiologically healthier going to have more energy to deal with it. So that's where it's interesting. It's about the exposure. It's about, the body's reaction to it, and then just the capacity to deal with things. And that's why some people will develop chronic heavy metal and toxic element toxicity over the years. It's because it's a constant, daily situation where their body cannot deal with it. And you get a little bit of accumulation every day because you're exposed to heavy metals. They're all over the place. You can't eat vegetables, and you just can't even eat a meal really without getting some level of heavy metals. And that's normal. It's just that if your body cannot process it, you're getting a little bit of storage. So you have to be more careful. So someone that is chronically ill might have to be a little bit more careful with eating seafood, opposed to someone that is very healthy because their body's able to process all of the, mercury that's in the seafood, opposed to someone that's not healthy. They can't process it efficiently.
So give us an example of what you've seen. A patient or a person comes to you for this detox program. What does that typically look like? What is that process?
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to detox. So one, I always say the key to one of the top keys to an effective detox is to get healthy. Right. And then they're like, well, that's not helpful. But that's really, you have to understand that as a foundation, because the healthier someone is, the better their natural detox functions are working.
Okay.
And that is really the key, because the body is designed, the body knows what it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's storing the toxic elements for a reason, and it's detoxing them when it wants to detox it. When we go in and we try to fight against the body's natural desire, that's where we kind of come into some issues, because we have this tug of war effect, and we're kind of trying to fight against what the body may or may not want to do. We think we know what the body needs, but we might not. The body always knows what it needs to do, and it acts accordingly. So there's different approaches, but one is just to get healthy. So let's say that someone is going through a severe emotional period, like going through a divorce or some, pretty significant emotional time of their life. They're probably going to be detoxing slower than they normally would, because their body is occupied with a lot of energy. And the reason for that is that the body's always trying, back to the short-term survival, the body will slow down natural detox during times of stress and during the higher the level of toxicity that becomes present. And you would think it'd be the opposite. The more toxic you become, the faster you detox, but it's the opposite. Because as you become more toxic in tissue, the body slows down. It stops sweating, or it slows down sweating. It slows down bioflow. It slows down lymph flow. It actually slows down natural detox processes, because it wants to keep the toxic elements hidden in storage, opposed to releasing them into the processing center, because the body just cannot handle that level of daily dose toxicity.
So trying to conserve energy, because obviously more energy is needed to handle the stress. And maybe cortisol has a factor in deciding between, metabolizing that detox element, whatever it is, and or sending it to storage.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, like, a lot of, doctors that are not necessarily like focused on detox, sometimes they're helping people detox even more than people that are exclusively helping people detox. Because it's like, if you're helping someone get healthy, you're helping them inherently detox better, because the body's working. But then even if someone's doing everything right and you're on all the right protocols, sometimes a little additional support is still needed to, kind of accelerate the process to get some of these toxic elements out. And then there's a number of different approaches that you can look at. So there's approaches that are designated or designed to take a toxic element from tissue and move it into the processing center for excretion. So that could be, it could even be a homeopathic remedy. It could be like a bitter agent that is designed to increase bile flow. So to push more toxicity out of the liver through bile. And there's chelation, where you're going in and trying to actually grab onto a heavy metal. There's all these methods. And the challenge is, if someone is already kind of at max capacity at what they can handle, maybe they're not as not as healthy as they want to be, those might not be doable for them because they experience terrible detox reactions. And a detox reaction or a detox symptom is just, it's when you get a headache or irritability. You feel terrible when you start doing one of these detox protocols. And that's a sign it's your body telling you there's more active toxicity than we're used to, or that, what we want to deal with. So when you take something from tissue and you move it into the processing center, if the processing center was already at max capacity and you just overflowed it, you're going to get symptoms. So in that situation, these people, a lot of doctors will deem these people too sick to detox. Like, oh, we can't, you can't do a detox protocol yet because you're too sick to do that. But in that situation, I would say they're not necessarily too sick to detox. They're too sick to detox in that way with that specific approach. And that's where there's other approaches that come into play, which is kind of what I specialize in, which is more of the stress reduction detox methodology. So such as using binders. So traditionally we have, binders that are, activated charcoal, pectins, clays, all these things. And the purpose of these is to go in, kind of mop things up, reduce the stress load, so then the body kind of can breathe a little bit. And there's some advantages to these. There's some disadvantages with a lot of these natural binders. They're not really designed for longer term use because they're indiscriminate. They go in and they just grab to everything. They could potentially cause nutrient depletion. They might be constipating, et cetera. And then, so that's why so my specialty is working with zeolite powder, which is kind of a next generation binder. And the way it works is through a swap mechanism. So opposed to just going in and indiscriminately binding everything, it swaps electrolytes, so potassium, sodium, magnesium, and calcium, for heavier elements. So it's got a cage, kind of a honeycomb cage-like structure. And zeolite is a naturally occurring mineral with a negative charge. It goes in and it'll bind, let's say it has magnesium in this cage, the zeolite cage, it comes across mercury. It swaps the magnesium for the mercury and traps the mercury in its cage and excretes it out of the body. But if it comes across an amino acid or another essential vitamin or something, it just leaves it alone because it already has the magnesium it prefers. So it's swapping opposed to just grabbing or absorbing everything. So it's basically considered a smart binder. So it's in the category of binder, but the advantage to that for sensitive individuals over some of the other methods like that are adding stress to the system is you're just going in and you're grabbing in the small intestine toxic elements that are currently present. And then that helps the body breathe. And then the body can start working a little bit better. So it binds to heavy metals. It binds to environmental toxicants like BPA and glyphosate. It's even been shown to bind to radioactive materials. So the zeolite we're talking about is clinoptilolite. It was used in the Chernobyl nuclear disaster to bind to radioactive elements in the water to clean it up. And it's been studied pretty extensively for water filtration. It's been used industrially. And it's been used in animals to bind to aflatoxins and ochratoxin A in the animal feed, right? So it binds to a lot of things. And I think one of the main advantages of it is its ability to bind to ammonia. Because when someone their body's not working properly, or if they have toxin overload, their liver is generally congested. They're probably not breaking down ammonia properly, and then it can build up. That can go to the bloodstream, that can go to the brain, cause a lot of issues. So just the binding to ammonia aspect, I think, is very important of zeolite. But just whatever it's binding to something in the GI tract, right? And by binding to it, that's less work for the body, because now the body doesn't have to process those things for excretion because they're already bound. Then the body can start dealing with other stuff. So a lot of people, when they take a binder like a zeolite, it'll calm the storm in the body, and then their body just starts working better. And then in some individuals, they then start naturally detoxing faster because they notice increased lymph flow, they start sweating, they notice increased bile flow because their body was kind of congested, kind of the detox machinery was a little clogged. Then the body says, all right, now we can open the floodgates because we've got this assistance to help remove the toxic elements.
Fascinating, I think, to hear you speak about, the systems and how the body can kind of regulate it while you're using what you described as with a binder, kind of having a selective binding process, and the body kind of being able to manage through that and recognize the level of response it has. I'm very curious about, though, if we are exposed in our environment to these toxins, how do we really treat this long term? Because the person is still going to be exposed to something or another that's really causing this. So what would be the root cause treatment for this sort of treatment?
So it's multifaceted. One is trying to reduce the exposure as much as possible. You can't eliminate it because we're always going to be exposed to some level of toxic elements. So one, if you're in a very toxic environment, then trying to eliminate that exposure, even even trying to clean up just
What
drinking
would be
better
a
water.
toxic environment for our audience?
I mean, if someone is in a town where they're like a coal mining town or something like like an industry town where there's just heavy metals and mercury in the air that they're breathing in on a daily basis, something like that would be the most obvious. Everyone is being in a city. If you're living in New York City opposed to living in the country in Wyoming, like there's going to be more pollution and more toxic elements in the air just from industry. And then you have electromagnetic smog as well. So if you're living next door to a big cell phone tower, that could be contributing not to accumulation of toxicity, but contributing to stress on the body, which could result in accumulation of other toxic elements. So there's all these things. The water is a big one. So if someone's just drinking tap water, generally not going to be the highest quality water. So people can go to ewg.org, environmentalworkinggroup.org, and there's a tap water database for all the municipalities in the country. And they can actually see some of the things that are in the water. And you can see that it might not be as clean as you thought it was because a lot of the regulations have not been like the regulatory, the safe limits of a lot of these toxic elements that are in the water have not been updated for decades. And even if they know now they're much more toxic than they originally thought, they still haven't updated the regulations. So this EWG will give people kind of what their safe limits are. And like, for example, where I live, the level of arsenic is over 1,000 times the safe level. But it's legal. So it's still the legal limit, but just because it's a legal limit doesn't mean it's safe. So just filtering, and I don't drink that water. So I've got a well Thanels valve, reverse osmosis, deionization, structuring, like all sorts of stuff. But just trying to purify your water is one source. Air purifiers, just whatever you can do to reduce what's coming in orally and what you're breathing in is a good start in terms of reducing the toxicity. And then the second aspect is getting your body in a better position to handle the toxicity, right? So let's say you're in a toxic environment and you cannot leave, like that's where you're at. Then the key is, all right, let's optimize physiological function so that the body is better able to deal with the toxicity when it comes in, so it can excrete it without having the issues, or, adding something like a zeocharged zeolite binder to help grab some of that toxicity in the small intestine to help accelerate the removal of it to help the body out. So there's different approaches, but really it's getting as healthy as you can, reducing some of the exposure, and potentially taking some additional detox support, maybe some liver support, some binders to help just naturally, to give the body a little bit of a boost in terms of its detox functions.
And it sounds like you have to do a lot of education to find root cause sources, correct, of where these sources of exposures are occurring. Tell us a little bit more about where other resources that you share with patients. I'm actually looking up the ewg.org website, the water database website. What other sources of exposures do we have in our environment currently, and why is it increasing?
Yeah, so I think there's all sorts of thoughts and theories on why it's increasing. I think one you have, and it depends on your region. So for example, I live in Iowa. So I live in the middle of a forest, but outside of my forest, you have cornfields, right? Lots of fields. So for me, some of the highest level exposure is going to be farming chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, and especially glyphosate, or basically the glyphosate capital of the world. So glyphosate is the active ingredient in a Roundup, which we know is, it's been banned in a lot of countries. It's quite toxic. And
It's
interestingly,
still not banned here.
No, it's not banned here. I see, they're spraying it all over the place. So I talk about corn sweat a lot because the Iowa is one of the most humid states in the country, which always surprises people because there's not a lot of water, but it's humid because there's so much agriculture, corn and soybeans, that the water gets absorbed through the soil up into the crops, and then the corn and the soy sweats it out, and it generates humidity. So you can actually see like mist in the evening over the fields, especially when we hit like July and August, when after they're grown. So like right now it's not that humid because the corn hasn't grown, but once you hit July, when it starts growing, the humidity increases because the corn is growing. The problem with this is all of these crops were sprayed with all sorts of chemicals, including Roundup, and glyphosate is actually water soluble. So what I'm thinking is, all right, the corn is sweating this toxic water, say filled toxic water into the air, which is then we're breathing it in, right? And it's being, the breeze is taking all over the state. So it's very interesting. Iowa also has one of the highest cancer rates in the country, second highest, and I think the top like increasing cancer rate and maybe the top pediatric cancer rate. So I think a lot of that does have to do with the farming chemicals. There's also high levels of radon and other things. So it's interesting. It kind of depends regionally where you're at. There's different levels of toxicity just naturally from the earth as well. And then what's going on. So there's the farming. Then you have the pollution from just factories. If you look in the sky, you've got all people, there's all sorts of thoughts on what's going on because you look up and there's a lot of stuff going on in the air with, planes, and whether people want to believe in, you call them chemtrails or not. Either way, when you have all of those trails, even if they're just contrails coming from planes, that's still not good to be breathing in, no matter if it was nefarious or not, right?
Yeah.
It's like, there's still a lot of lead, talking about lead from before, lead in the jet fuel and things. So just from an increased airplane activity, increased automobile activity, just that all contributes to kind of pollution. And we're just breathing a lot of that stuff in. So
breathing it or drinking it or absorbing it through our skin, I know we test for these things both by blood sampling, stool sampling, hair sampling, and maybe even sweat. I imagine urine. And I also know as a physician, when we were talking about lead exposure, of course, there was a international campaign against lead exposure that was quite effective, but it still tends to be a problem. And now the requirements for lead testing are even more stringent because we had a treatment, we used to actually treat among a certain level, and now we treat even at a microscopic level compared to what we used to treat for. But it's still a concern that we see, even with promotion for testing and advocacy and raising awareness. We're still exposed to now, as you mentioned, just from agricultural and mining and our environment, EMFs, as you mentioned as well. It seems like we are kind of overhauled by all of the exposures. What is this best way that you would suggest, testing your environment? How would one really assess the safety in their own home environment or in their school or work environment?
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. So there's different, you could spend as much money as you want in testing. So you can test the environment and you can test your body.
Yeah.
Or you could test both. So like with mold, for example, you can test the environment for mycotoxins. You can test your body for excretion or immune reactivity to mycotoxins to see if there's, antibodies being produced against them. So there's different methods. I'd say for school, like I just interviewed someone 2 days ago who had just quit her job as a teacher because the building had flooded and she was getting chronic illness, chronic symptoms from mold toxicity. And there's a combination, a synergistic effect between mold toxicity and EMFs as well. And a lot of the schools will put cell phone towers on the school or on the property because I think they get paid by the companies. So when you have the mold growing, whether this is in your house or in your workplace or whatever, it's the mold is not necessarily causing the problem. It's the mold toxins or the mycotoxins that are being released during stress when the mold is stressed out. So when you scrub it, you clean it, you're releasing mycotoxins that might be poisoning you. But the electromagnetic frequencies like Wi-Fi also irritate the mold. So now we have the same amount of mold we used to, but so many people have mold toxicity. And I think it's because there's more Wi-Fi and wireless signals that are irritating the mold. So there's more mycotoxins present in the air, which is causing more of an inflammatory immune response. So one test would be like a mold test for the environment to see. But then, like, I personally don't use Wi-Fi. If one simple thing people can do is just turn their Wi-Fi router off at night, because you want to have as clean of a sleep environment as possible. I have everything hardwired, but just turning it off at night is a really good place to start. It doesn't cost you anything. Just turn it back on before you use it. There's way more advanced concepts. Like I use little cards and things that can help modulate the response.
Yeah.
So
what
actually,
was that card? Yeah.
So this is actually, I made this. This hasn't even launched yet. This is coming out on Tuesday. This will be launched in like 3 days, but this is the EMF structuring card. So essentially you put this on a Wi-Fi router or a cell phone, and it helps it harmonizes the field to the point where it makes it a little bit more biocompatible. So, and we have thermography. We sent it in for testing before. That's why we haven't launched it yet. But the thermography results showed almost 100% mitigation from the cell phone radiation. So the non-protected the person that puts a cell phone up to their head and does a before and after thermal imaging you can see a greatly increased heat signature in the brain from using a cell phone. And then when you put this on the cell phone, you see it mitigate that a lot. So there's things like that. This is kind of next level stuff. And there's a lot of stuff. I sent one of the top competitors and for testing and it didn't work at all. So you can't just buy like little things like this and expect that it's going to completely protect you. But there's things like that if you've already done everything else to kind of take your health to the next level. But I would say, cutting out the Wi-Fi, don't put your cell phone under your pillow or right next to your bed when it's turned on at night. Like you want to distance is your friend when it comes to frequencies. The closer you are to something emitting radiation, electromagnetic radiation, the worse it's going to be for you. So, and that could even be dirty electricity in your wall. So some people notice like, okay, if I sleep on this side of the room, I feel way worse than if I sleep on this side. Well, don't sleep on the side you feel worse because there's probably some sort of current being generated there from the wall, or even getting deep into it, like geopathic stress, where there's natural frequencies coming from the earth that can be harmful in certain areas. So that's where like you have certain pockets of houses where everyone develops cancer. And a lot of times that's actually geopathic stress, where it's just they're on some sort of like fault line or something where it's stressing them out daily. So it's very interesting. That stuff is like way next level, and it's a little bit harder to test for.
I can definitely see the advantages of kind of knowledge here. First and foremost is for our audience too, to kind of really educate themselves about where they live and how they live, and not really ignoring that, because mental illness, we see a lot of mental illness worsening, especially in children, which is very, very sad to see. And the exposure risk that they have cumulative over the course of their lives because of the way we're living. And the way that we've advanced our living, say, quote unquote, advanced our living, we actually have created all these problems, and the exposure is now even earlier. So it makes one feel like a little overwhelmed by, all of the things and then, and how can one really live? It just puts that to question. So back to your, the work that you do, what do you notice when patients are using or undergoing treatment, how that impacts them? Some of the stories that you hear from people who've used your product.
Yeah. So two types of person. First, I want to say for people listening, it's the worst thing to do is panic and start just overthinking about the level of toxicity you're exposed to, because that level of stress you're going to generate from that is going to maybe be worse than the toxic exposure. So
yeah,
just, it's okay. Your body's designed to detox. Your body is very resilient. It's really amazing how well the body is designed and what it can handle, what we put it through.
Yeah.
So just, it's okay. And then just do what you can when you can. And, maybe in the future, if you can be in a better environment or do more for your health as finances improve or whatever, then do it at that time. But do what you can when you can, and then just do your best, right? Go from there. In terms of what people experience, there's a short-term and the long-term benefits. So in terms of a detox protocol, when I'm saying this right now, I'm saying removing mercury from the brain or a deeply stored toxic element from the brain or somewhere in the tissue. The ideal situation is actually to feel nothing right away. Because if you feel nothing, it means your body is efficiently handling the removal of those toxic elements from tissue. If you feel terrible, which is usually what happens when people detox, it's because it's stressful on the way out. So you want the least amount of turbulence possible as these toxic elements are leaving. So in those situations, if you don't feel anything, that's actually good. Generally, if you had a symptom or condition you were trying to see a resolution with, a lot of times you start seeing improvement about 3 to 6 months later, because it takes a long time to start. The longer you've had them, the longer it takes to remove, because your body only lets go at its own pace to protect you. It's not going to let go of everything at once, right? So this is a multi-month process, maybe a multi-year process. So 3 to 6 months later is when people a lot of times notice, oh, my brain fog's gone, or, my memory, usually it's like a spouse says, oh, you can recall names now. Everything's just working better, right? So that's very common. Some people feel better right away, and some people never feel anything at all. And they're disappointed, but that's still not bad, because you probably prevented a potentially bad situation in the future. It's never a bad thing to get these things out of tissue, right? They might not be causing problems now, but they might be causing problems later. So you might as well get them out as quickly as you can to prevent that. But the people that feel better right away, it's generally because their body is so overburdened on a daily basis that they can't even handle all the stress of their daily life. And when you take like a Zeocharge binder, it grabs a lot of that. It puts their body under that stress threshold. It can kind of breathe. it calms down the inflammatory reaction. It just calms things down and they feel better. I mean, sometimes within the first couple of days or the first week. And then when they go off of it, maybe they feel worse again. And that's because they still have that high level of daily dose toxicity. So there's the two camps. One, if you feel better right away, that's not necessarily indicative of a deep level detox, like from your brain. Although people a lot of times feel, better in their brain right away, but that's because there's a lot of inflammatory things that can cause brain fog. But anyway, so you might feel better right away. You might feel better in 3 to 6 months, or you might not feel better at all. But either way, you're getting toxic stuff out of your body, and that's a win.
Yeah. So really observing the body's response while treating. What type of mental health benefits have you seen in the treatment?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a pretty big connection between certain mental health conditions and heavy metal toxicity. And I mean, with mental health conditions, there's generally a GI component. So they go hand in hand. When your gut is disrupted, a lot of times the mental health issues start in the GI tract, right? So because when you have increased intestinal permeability in the gut, you have increased intestinal permeability in the brain. And they kind of go hand in hand. And it can be
Yes.
reversed too. Even a concussion can cause leaky gut, right? So they can
Yes.
go kind of can be inversely related. But so binding in the gut can be largely helpful because when you have an increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut, a lot of the things that are coming in through just food that your body would normally process and excrete without issue, they're now leaking through the small intestinal lining, entering circulation where they don't belong, and that's where they will incite an inflammatory reaction from the immune response. So by binding to some of those things in the GI tract, it can help prevent that. And when you prevent that reaction, it prevents the reaction of that getting to the brain and causing the inflammatory brain reaction as well. So it just depends on what is causing some of the issues. I mean, there's so many things that cause mental health issues. It may have nothing to do with physical toxicants, right? I mean, there's certain conditions that are more correlated than others, potentially like bipolar and schizophrenia and things that generally there's a high toxic metal burden present. But the other interesting thing is, let's say the heavy metals and toxic elements had nothing to do with the brain, with the mental health initially, but then the body is so stressed out by the mental health condition that it starts accumulating heavy metals and toxic elements over time because now it can't process them efficiently. And now they become a contributing factor to the condition, making it even worse. So even if it's not the cause, it might be an effect and then a contributing factor. So a lot of people have noted a pretty significant improvement in the mental health, but it just really depends on the person. It also really depends on the response to detox because either when you take something like a binder, like Zeocharge, it's either going to add stress to your system or reduce stress on your system. If it adds stress to your system, then it could actually accelerate the symptoms you're experiencing. If it reduces the stress, that's what you're going for. And that's where like dosing is crucially important. So there's a reverse titration schedule with Zeocharge, where with most things you start with a lower dose, you work up. You don't want to do that with high quality zeolite powder because the higher doses are actually less likely to cause the detox reactions. So we don't have to get into it, but there's a whole bunch of information on that on my website, zeolitelabs.com. I've got a pretty lengthy document going into the zeolite dosing paradox. But if you're someone that is concerned with detox reactions and maybe you have tried detox before and it hasn't worked out for you, you don't want to microdose it because the microdosing is actually the worst idea and it's more likely to cause stress on your system than a higher dose.
Yeah. And I do want to stress that there are some key neurological impacts with exposure that do affect the mood conditions, depression, anxiety, stress tolerance, as you mentioned, neuroinflammation, altering the gut-brain permeability. And I'm just summarizing things that you've kind of spoke about. Cognitive decline, we see that, as you mentioned it, with Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases. And of course, behavioral issues, which we see in children, cognitive impairment, they're not doing well at school or dropping or changing or regression in their developmental growth and milestones. Exposures that do cause some of these things are from the drinking water, fish, as we mentioned, certain foods, and of course, agricultural products, lead-based paint, which was, is now off the market, but still available in some cosmetics, traditional remedies, even posing risks. So there's several types of exposures, and it's always good to consult a professional and a doctor for these sort of treatments as well. And that I want to make that kind of clear to our audience too, that this is not to be taken lightly, that this does require evaluation and monitoring, and of course, lifestyle interventions. So thank you. Thank you for being here and thank you for the work that you're doing. How would somebody find out more about your work and some of the published studies or evidence-based research that you alluded to?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. First of all, this was a lot of fun. I think I had a good time at least. So hopefully the audience did too. But yeah, the best source of overall information and education is going to be zeolitelabs.com. That's got a lot of information. We did a 6-month case studies program prior to launching, just to show that the product actually was safe and that it worked, et cetera. So you can view some of those case studies on the website as well. So that's going to be probably the best. There's a lot of information on the site. So I'd go to the site. We also have Instagram at Zeolite Labs. So Instagram and zeolitelabs.com are going to be the two best places to learn more.
Yeah. And I think there's so much to learn. A very fascinating topic. And I think it's definitely in conventional medicine, we need to know more about it. I'm sure you see patients coming in who have been gaslit and from the conventional space and then find out that they actually have this kind of exposure. And so it's important, again, that doctors be also aware of the options for this risk. And in closing, we always usually ask our guest a question because this is Too Curious MD. So we want you to ask us or the audience, or even for our next episode, a curious question or a question that maybe you still have about further work that, you're doing with the work you're doing with patients.
Okay. So how about this? What is one thing right now that you think is way overhyped
Yeah.
in either medicine or natural health that a lot of people are jumping on board with that you would maybe caution against?
Gosh, I don't think people are jumping high enough. I think the exposure is microplastics. I think it's a hype, but it's also something that's not really fully understood. So I would say that. I think, yeah, Wi-Fi exposure, I think it's a hype, but I don't think it's a hype enough. So I think it's a lack of awareness that I see. And I think when we talk about integrative medicine, people come in to their doctor and they're depressed or they're not getting better or they have insulin resistance. So there's something going on besides the condition itself. It's more, and having a look at the environment can be a key factor. So I would say it's the opposite. There's not enough hype out there. What would be your answer to that question?
Well, and I was kind of not even thinking about detox. I was just thinking about in general. So I would say for me, I would say, so I'm kind of contrarian.
Yeah.
Anytime everyone is doing something, I usually just automatically don't do it. Just because, I don't know, I don't like going with the crowd. So for me, it would be
Yeah.
like the GLP-1 craze.
Yes.
I mean, even relating that to, well, first of all, it's just being so promoted. I just talked to two people that the doctors, they went to the doctors and the doctors kind of were like yelling at them and called them both obese and were very rude and then said that you don't care about your health unless you go on GLP-1s.
Oh.
And it was just like this high pressure sales situation. But I think so that would be the one that's probably most irritating to me right now
Yeah.
because it's like everyone needs to do it and you don't even care about your health if you're not on it. And from a detox perspective, there's a number of concerns because the body is sometimes storing extra body fat as a protective layer against microplastics and other
Yeah.
toxic elements. Because if it's not in the general fat, that's going to be lost through a GLP-1, and it's also muscle and other things being lost, but then it's going to be in an organ. And you'd rather have a microplastic in your stomach belly fat opposed to in your brain where it's
Correct.
causing more issues, right? So a lot of times people will lose a lot of weight very quickly and then you get a dump of this toxicity and then the body, you get very sick or you get a redistribution of those microplastics and heavy metals to organs and that could cause, issues long-term. So that'd be my answer.
Well, that's a beautiful answer, and I'm so glad that we're ending on this because it's such a delicate balance between, and I think that's the nuance that you mentioned in the beginning is that this is so nuanced, and we cannot ignore the power that the body has and the resiliency that the body has, and the ability to really stay in touch with that capacity and to even and really understand it before implementing all these different things and keeping that in mind. And yes, yeah, I definitely agree with the push from pharmaceuticals, especially about the certain drugs that are being flooding, doctors' offices and with a lot of push, I think, in medicine as well, that aren't fully understood and don't really address the question that you just brought up, which is the body's response to that, and or is treatment the right time for this, or is this really the right thing? And it's not universal to all people, correct?
Just one more on that. I was piggyback off of that really quickly. I think the same thing is, it's not just conventional medicine. It's natural medicine and alternative and functional medicine practitioners that are doing the same things. And one thing I'll say is, just because something is natural doesn't mean it's good for you. And just because you feel better doesn't mean it's helping you, right? So just because you're taking an herb or a natural remedy doesn't mean it's something you should be taking every day. It's basically a natural medication. And if it's still going against what the body wants to do, if you sustain that for multiple months or multiple years, there could still be negative ramifications.
That's true. That's true. If it worked at one point, doesn't mean it continues to work at the same way. Correct. Because it's interacting with the body as it changes and evolves. Thank you. That is right. I think when we talk about integrative medicine and staying curious, I think in this podcast, we really want to push that layer of curiosity forward and keep asking questions, and paying attention to the body's response and being even curious to what the ability that your body has. So thank you for being here, Jeff. Fascinating topic. More to come, I'm sure. More to learn.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Too Curious MD podcast. We hope today's episode inspired you to ask new questions and explore fresh perspectives. We challenge you to ask us those unasked questions that you're curious about in your medical practice, condition, health, and wellness.
If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe, share it with somebody just as curious, and leave us a review. It helps us keep the curiosity alive. Post or comment with a question or curious inquiry that you have and seek to explore or learn with us. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.